Ask you a question, which is going to be the theme of our conversation today, which is the question is, are you coachable? Are you coachable? So just for context, I'm sitting outside because I got some folks in my house and we're still in pandemic mode. So besides that, it's a really wonderful spring day here in Northern California. So why sit in the office when I can sit outside and get the same work done? So why this question, are you coachable? Are you coachable? Well, I mean, of course, first of all, I'm a coach. Our entire company, Sales Quality, is focused on coaching early stage B2B startups. But this is a question I've had on my mind for a while, both on a personal level, because I've worked with coaches throughout my entire life in different ways, starting with my dad being a coach of my soccer team when I was 8 years old, my baseball team when I was 8 years old, all the way through my adolescence and into high school. I've worked with coaches in my training that I've talked about, my endurance training. I've worked with business coaches, speaking coaches. And so maybe that's one of the reasons, first of all, why I'm a coach myself, is just I've found that coaches over the years have helped me tremendously in the work that I wanted to get done on the professional side and to help me pursue the things I wanted to pursue on the personal side of my life. More specifically, though, when it comes to this topic, are you coachable? There's been a couple of, I guess, confluence or serendipitous events of some kind that have kind of come together in the last couple of weeks that have kind of burst this topic, this question, to the top of my mind. So the first is that about a year or so ago, I bought a copy of this book called Trillion Dollar Coach. And by the way, I think I just had a little burp there. So I apologize for that if you heard that. You might also hear some birds in the background or my dog occasionally barking, which will probably be a lot more pleasant. That's what you get when you're recording this stuff live. So I bought this book, Trillion Dollar Coach, which is co-authored by Eric Schmidt, who is as many of you know, was the CEO that was brought in to run Google in the early growth stages there. He's co-authored that with two other authors that including Jonathan Rosenberg and Alan Eagle. So I bought this book about a year or so ago because I'm naturally interested in that topic and also just keen to hear more about Bill Campbell, who I'd never actually learned about. I never knew about Bill Campbell until this book came out, and probably like a lot of you may not have heard of Bill Campbell, and if you don't know this book, you may still not know who Bill Campbell is. The short of it is Bill Campbell is literally the trillion-dollar coach. So over the course of his life, the latter part of his life as an executive coach, he coached many of the executives at Google, including Eric Schmidt, Larry Page, Sergey Brin, and he coached many of the executives at Apple, including Steve Jobs. He's coached Marissa Mayer, who is now formerly at Google and now at Yahoo. And so those are just a couple of the key executives across his career that he has coached in Silicon Valley. And so I was curious to read the book and hear about how he went about this process. And Eric Schmidt lays this out in the book itself. And a lot of the conversation that Eric has in the book is really talking through how Bill coaches people coached people, the frameworks that he used, some of the mantras, some of the axioms that he used as a way to really help some of the top, like literally the top performers in all of the business world learn how to do better, how to be better managers, how to be better people, how to be better teammates. And so I've been reading this book, and so this has made this idea of like, well, what makes for a coachable person has come to mind. So that's one piece. The second is that I've been training for the Western States 100, which I've talked about in previous LinkedIn Lives and other podcasts. It's a huge ultra marathon, 100-mile race at the end of June here in Northern California. It's considered by many to be kind of like one of the penultimate ultra marathons because it's one of the oldest, if not the oldest, 100-mile ultra marathon, and very, very difficult to get into. I was fortunate to get a spot because our running club locally runs an aid station there, and as one of the payments, if you will, or exchanges for running the aid station, we get one spot in the race each year, and then our club gives that spot to somebody based on merit in their activity with the running club. So I've been really active and working hard to helped the running club over the last few years, and so I earned that spot through the running club. So that's been a big piece, and I've worked with endurance coaches in the past with my triathlon training in the past, and found those to be really valuable to help me keep pushing myself to see how fast I can go, how much stronger I can get, how much more I can improve on times, just to see what I'm capable of. So that's the second piece, is that in this training every day, I'm working with my coach in the training programs that he has set out for me and executing on that. And some days it's, most days it's not very fun, but I'm doing it for a reason. I'm going through the short-term pain of this training program in order to get, hopefully, the long-term benefit, or the goal, the objective for me is to complete the race, of course, but also I want to complete the race in under 24 hours, which is considered to be a pretty difficult task, not undoable for most mortals like me. It's not just professionals that can finish under 24 hours, but it's certainly going to be a push for me. I've never completed a 24-hour race in under 24 hours. I've done 3 of them so far, but haven't broken that threshold. I think I'm capable of it with the right training, and that's why I'm working with the coach. And the third piece of this, which is why I'm asking this question, are you coachable, is that I'm a regular listener to the Tim Ferriss show, and recently he just posted an interview this week with George Mumford. So George Mumford was a coach to the Chicago Bulls team in the 90s. He's coached many NBA players and professional athletes, including Kobe Bryant, Shaquille O'Neal, and many others. And I first came across George Mumford in a podcast interview a couple of years ago, and I bought a copy of his book, The Mindful Athlete. And I've had this on my shelf. I've read it and reread it. It's been on my nightstand. I just picked up the book and will read parts because of his process of mindfulness. As much as he coaches athletes, mindfulness is a skill that you can apply to any point, any part of your life. And so, just like I do here in a lot of my lessons from the trail, I'm taking what I learned in my sports or personal pursuits and applying them to the business world. It's the same here with his book, George Mumford's book, The Mindful Athlete. So I've had these, a book, a podcast, my own personal work as a trainee, if you will, or as an athlete getting trained. And so it's gotten me thinking about this question, like what makes for a coachable person? Because I feel like I'm pretty coachable. I've been on sports teams my whole life. And like I said, I've had business coaches and managers that have coached me to be successful in different roles, including 2 different coaching programs I belong to now as part of my business. One is a program that it's a group of consultants and coaches. I've been part of that group for over 5 years now, and it's a community that helps each other out as much as we're learning from the people that run the program. And I'm also part of a program called Clockwork, which is more of an operations coaching program founded by a guy named Michael McCallowitz, who wrote several business books you might have come across, one called Profit First, another called The Pumpkin Plan. And it's helped me to be a better founder and CEO of my own company, a better operator of the business, and it's helped the business to become a better operation altogether. So I've got all these convergence of coachability, of coaching, and I feel like I consider myself to be pretty coachable. And so I kind of took a lot of the learnings that I've been reading and what Eric Schmidt shared about how Bill Campbell went about coaching and who he was able to coach and who he considered to be coachable. The podcast interview with George Mumford had several really wonderful frameworks that he shared about what a person needs to do if they really want to make a shift in their mindset, they really want to make a shift in their behavior, they really want to make a shift in their life. And so what I did is I just kind of came up with a couple of, I guess, I don't know if I'd call them rules or a checklist, if you will, around like what do I find to be someone who's coachable, what makes for coachability, if you will. I've, over the course of 10 years of running this company, I ran sales quality as a part-time endeavor for about 5 years before I stepped away and made this my full-time work back in 2015. And over the course of those 10 plus years, I've talked to, by estimating the number of phone calls and conversations and Zoom meetings and workshops and on-site visits, I've I think it's pretty accurate. I've met and talked with over 2,000 startup founders over the last 10 years, and I've coached hundreds of those founders and their sales teams through a coaching program. And throughout that coaching program, I've run, again, probably a couple thousand, probably 2,000, up to 2,000 coaching sessions just in the last 5 years, whether those are small group sessions, individual one-on-one sessions, parts of other team meetings, and coaching them on how to run their business. So I feel like I've got quite a bit of experience when it comes to identifying what makes for someone that is coachable, a startup founder, an early stage leader in a company, and what makes for somebody who's not coachable or somebody that I would consider uncoachable. And it's always surprising to me and a little bit puzzling when I find somebody that I feel like isn't coachable. It doesn't mean that my assessment of their coachability is 100% accurate all the time. Certainly that might just be personality mismatch where they're just not responding to my style, or their method of learning, or their personal way of being just doesn't align with mine, and so there's a mismatch and it's hard to communicate, and that's okay. But I would say that I feel fairly confident that within some level of accuracy I can identify someone who I would find to be coachable versus somebody who I'd find to be generally uncoachable. And so I'm always surprised and puzzled to find when there's a startup founder or leader, or really anyone that, you don't have to be a startup founder to, want or need coaching. I think we can all do better. And so I guess I'm surprised when I find someone that's not responsive to coaching, or isn't willing to be coached, or even for the people who say they're coachable, or people that say they want to help, when it comes time to actually engaging in that client coaching relationship, they're oftentimes unresponsive or unwilling to be coached. As much as somebody might say they want to coach, they want to change, or someone that might say they want to learn, or somebody might say they want to grow, most people just they just frankly won't make the time. It's not about finding the time, it's about making the time. They won't be open to criticism. They won't be willing to put in the consistent work required to make the change that's required to happen. And so, and in many cases, some people are just so anchored or so wed to their view of their self or their situation, their identity or their process, that they are today or were yesterday, that they're just unable to make that shift in their mindset, in their actions, in their behavior to grow and change. So when I think about coachability, what makes for someone that's coachable, and if you think about are you coachable? There's 5 areas, or kind of principles, or items on a checklist that I would consider to be the necessary components. Kind of these core 5. There's probably others, but these core 5 are what I would define as being someone that is in fact coachable. So I'm going to talk through these 5, and you can use this as your own mental checklist and see where you are. And consider, as you're going through these 5 for yourself, or for maybe a team member that you feel like could use some coaching, you don't have to think of it as an absolute scale, like am I yes, am I no. It doesn't have to be binary of either I am or I'm not one of these things. You can think of it as a sliding scale. Oftentimes in our coaching program, and oftentimes in our trainings, our live trainings that we'll do, both public and with our clients, we like to use a sliding scale of 1 to 4. So 4 would be, in the green, an extreme yes. 1 would be, non-existent or no. 2 or 3 is somewhere in the middle. And the reason I like 1 to 4, this is something I learned from Trish Bertuzzi years ago in a podcast interview when she joined me here on my podcast. And she likes 1 to 4 because there's no middle ground, right? If you go 1 to 10, most people say, oh, I'm a 7. If you go 1 to 5, people oftentimes give themselves a 3. So this idea of 1 to 4, there's no middle ground. You're either sort of nudging towards the 4, you're a 3 or a 4, and there's 1 or 2 things you could work on if you're a 3 to make you a 4, or you're a 1 or a 2, right? And you're then less than halfway there. And so think about this maybe on a scale of 1 to 4 on this assessment, if you will, if you want to do a self-assessment or a team member assessment, to ask yourself, am I 1, a 2, or 3, or 4? 1 being kind of in the red, 2 or 3 being in the middle, like a yellow, and 4 being a green. You're in the green. You're like, yeah, I'm definitely one of those. I'm definitely that trait. So let's go. Let's dive in, right? So the first trait that I would consider to be necessary for someone to be coachable is readiness to learn. Readiness to learn. This means that you're ready to focus. You're ready to get to work. My wife is a pilot, an instructor, flight instructor, excuse me. So she teaches private pilots how to get their private pilot license. And so there's a local airport here affiliated with the University of California, Davis. And so she goes down there. She has a couple of students that she works with part-time in between her work as a PhD economist at UC Davis and in between being a mom and a wife and everything else that we do in our life. It's just one of the things that it's her passion and brings her joy. And she actually talks about this as one of the fundamental learnings, that as she was learning to be a flight instructor, they taught her this about people that she was teaching, this idea of readiness to learn. Because a lot of people like the idea of flying an airplane. They want to fly a Cessna. They like the idea of being able to hop in a plane and buzz around and go out to the coast for the day or go up to the mountains and be a pilot. There's a lot of work that goes into being a pilot beyond just learning how to operate the mechanical aspects of the plane. There's, learning weather. There's learning how to read a chart. There's all the rules and regulations. There's the radio calls that you have to be able to do when you're up in the air. There's learning all the emergency procedure. Like most of what you're doing when you're flying, you're not actually flying. You're managing your environment. You're managing your situation. You're interpreting where you are and what needs to happen next, and you're communicating. And it turns out that all of that other work is not all that much fun. I mean, there's an entire rules manual. It's really thick. We've got one on our shelf. It's like 2 inches thick of just rules and regulations that you have to learn if you want to pass your private pilot's license. Reading a chart is actually really difficult. You got to figure out airspace, and you have to read weather and figure out how much crosswind is too much. When do you have to squawk a flight? And so most people love the idea of flying the plane, but they don't love the idea of learning how to fly the plane. And there's this idea of readiness to learn. Somebody has to be ready to learn and want to learn those regulations. They have to want to learn aerodynamics, and they have to want to learn weather, and they have to want to learn how to make the right decision. And so this idea of readiness to learn means that you are ready to focus. You're ready to get the work, to do everything that's necessary, not just the things you want to do. And that also includes making the time to do the work. So yes, schedules are overloaded. You're always going to feel too busy. Usually the people that are the busyness are the people that need the coaching the most, right? So you're never going to be alone. Hi. Speaking of my wife, she just came out. That's okay. She's taking the dog for a walk. So you're never going to be done the to-do list. And a lot of times I'll hear from people who say they want to be coached. It's like, well, I would love to get some coaching, but once I get through this next week or this month or this quarter or this year, then I'll get some coaching. Or once I do this next thing, then I'll do some coaching. And we both know that's never going to happen. You're never going to be done the to-do list. And that's all the more reason to work with a coach, to identify where you might be wasting some time or suboptimally using your time, where to adjust your focus to get away from the busyness to growing yourself and growing your business. But all of this means you have to be ready for change. You have to be ready to leave some of that calendar stuff behind. You have to be ready to trash it or trim it or delegate it off or leave that personal identity of I've got a busy schedule, and maybe you self-identify with having a busy schedule. There's a certain amount of pride that you have with being so busy as a CEO, because that's just what startup CEOs do. So you've got to be ready to make that time and move your schedule and move your calendar, because you're never going to have the time. You're never going to have enough time. You've got to make the time. And all that comes into being ready to learn, where you have to say, enough is enough. I'm not going to take this anymore. I'm now ready to learn. I'm ready to do what it takes in order to get to that next level, to make that shift as a leader, to make a shift as a team member, to make a shift as a company. So you can ask yourself, on a scale 1 to 4, are you a 1, 2, or 3, or 4? How ready are you to learn? And that will help you start to figure out how coachable you are. So that's number 1. Number 2 is honesty and humility. So this is the willingness to look for gaps and blind spots, to accept that these gaps exist without judgment or blame or excuses. Eric Schmidt talks about this in the book. He talks about two different traits, these two different traits. And I'll just read from the book. It says, the traits that make a person coachable include honest and humility, and the willingness to persevere and work hard, and a constant openness to learning. So, like, wherever you stand, that's where you are, right? It doesn't matter how you got there. What matters is starting with that brutal honesty about your situation, being honest about it. Because I think a lot of times it's easy to say, well, yeah, things aren't as bad as I think, or like, well, we've been trying this one strategy, it's not working right now, but if I keep doing it for like another 3 months, then maybe things will turn around. Maybe they will. Oftentimes, that's just us failing to be honest with ourselves, failing to be humble enough to say, look, I'm trying this thing, it's not working. And maybe it's a little embarrassing because you put in a lot of time and effort, or because you put a lot of credence to it. You shared with your team, like, hey, we're going to do this thing. We're going to change the product and launch this feature, and then it's going to be great. And then people are going to start to buy. And now you've changed the product. You've done the big PR, and you've done the press release, and now the feature is out. And the people that said they were going to buy from you after that feature or after that integration still ain't buying. And that's hard. That takes some humility to say I was wrong. Like, if they're not buying in the first 2 months after you launch the new product or the new release, okay, are you going to keep going and say, well, we'll just give it 2 more months? Or are you going to be honest and humble and say, like, all right, I was wrong. Or maybe I was partially right, but there's still some other things we got to fix in our sales process before they're ready to buy, right? So being honest, being humble, having that humility is critical. Because in order to make improvements, we have to be able to take stock of where we are. And starting with the truth is the place to begin in order to get better. So that's what I would say is number 2, honesty and humility. So again, rate yourself or rate your team member, 1, 2, 3, or 4. Are you willing to be honest? Have you, in the past, when something didn't work out, how quickly were you able to look at what you're doing and say, okay, this isn't working, I got to make a change? And you're willing to make that adjustment and to be honest and be humble with yourself, with a spouse. I mean, I remember times with my own business here where I remember when I first stepped away from leading the sales team and the go-to-market team at Blend, I had great visions of where I could take this business. I already built a lot of the foundations with 5 years of doing coaching part-time and having a sense for what I felt like I could do with the business if I could just focus on the business full time. And I remember in those first couple months, I had these grand visions on how we were going to grow to $1 million business in a year, and we're going to have all these great CEOs are going to come join the program, and I was going to coach them, and I was going to scale the team, and I had these great visions. And after the first couple of months, what I realized is that that $1 million revenue rate in that first year, frankly, it was just obscene to think that I could do that. And that the most important thing that I could do in that first year is, frankly, just survive my own mistakes. Because as you get out there, and many of you could probably appreciate this, like, you have all of the ideas of how you think you got to run the business and how the product should be and how you should sell and how you should hire and how you should raise capital. And, much as Steve Blank has said in the past, no business plan survives first contact with the market. I'm paraphrasing there, right? And it's the same with your business, right? And yourself and the plans that you have. And so being honest and humble and saying, okay, well, shit, I thought I was going to be able to grow from, a couple $1,000 a month to $1 million in 12 months. Like, okay, that's a real reality check. So being honest and being humble is really important as you're growing the business. And that's going to keep happening as you grow, because once you get to $1 million in revenue, then everything is going to probably break again. I've shared this with our clients, and I've shared this in different workshops, the rule of 3 and 10, where as your company grows by orders of 3 and 10, everything tends to break. This is something I learned from Phil Lebon at Evernote, who learned it from Hiroshi Mikitani. And so just because you knew what you were doing to get to $1 million in revenue doesn't mean you know what to do to get to 3 million. And just because you got to 3 million doesn't mean you know what to do to get to 10 million. Everything's going to break. You're going to have to shift how you sell. You're going to have to shift how your product works. You're going to have to shift how you support customers. You're going to have to shift how you manage. You're going to have to shift. That was a Freudian slip, maybe. You're going to have to shift how you communicate with your team, right? And so being honest and being humble about where you are. Okay, great. Like you got to $1 million, you got to $3 million, you got to $10 million in revenue. Are you being honest and humble about what you need to do in order to get to that next level, to get to 10 or 30 in revenue? So honesty and humility is number 2. Number three, the willingness of somebody to get uncomfortable. So the actions, the decisions, the choices that you made, as I just said, in the past are what got you here today. And that doesn't mean that those are going to be the same actions, decisions, or choices that will get you to that next level, to grow, to shift, to learn. You're going to have to deploy new actions. You're going to have to deploy new strategies, build new systems, learn new skills. And that means getting uncomfortable. I've often thought about transitioning out of endurance running and into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. My son started taking Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu a couple of years ago. He hasn't been doing any classes over the past year since the pandemic. And I've always had an interest in it, even before he showed interest. And I've gotten to know the local guy named Michael Quigley, who runs the BJJ gym that my son goes to, and he's become a friend of mine. And I thought, like, if I was going to learn from somebody, I would want to learn from him. And what that would mean, though, is for me shifting away from endurance running and training, because I can't do that plus learn Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu because of the amount of time and focus it would take to do that properly. So and the question is, am I willing to get uncomfortable starting back at zero at something? Getting on the mat and getting my ass kicked. Like learning something totally new is really hard. Getting uncomfortable means that you know there's going to be this awkward learning anytime that something's new, but it's the only path to growth. So to be coachable, you need to get comfortable with getting uncomfortable, or getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, and let go of those anchors of the past. I've also heard David Goggins. Some of you might know his book Can't Hurt Me. David Goggins, he's got a YouTube channel. I've watched some of his stuff as well, and he talks about this. Like, you have to get comfortable being uncomfortable when it comes to training. He does a lot of life coaching and coaching around fitness and endurance racing. And the only way to grow is to get uncomfortable. And that's part of what I'm doing right now in this training program with Jeff Browning, who's coaching me with the Western States 100. He's having me do and it's not just the running that he has me doing that's uncomfortable. That's actually the easy part. It's the strength training. It's the conditioning. It's the mobility work. He has me doing different exercises that are difficult to do. And they're very humbling when I can't do a one-legged squat, when I can't do a runner's arabesque without falling over on my butt. It sucks, right? But you have to be willing to get comfortable being uncomfortable, or be comfortable getting uncomfortable. So that's another place where you can grade yourself, say 1 to 4. How willing are you? How comfortable are you with getting uncomfortable and knowing that that's the only path to learn? So that brings us to number 4. So number 4, I wrote down here in my notes: acknowledgement, acceptance, and action. Acknowledgement, acceptance, and action. So this is the fourth trait, if you will, the ability to acknowledge, the ability to accept, and the ability to take action. So in the podcast interview that George Mumford, where he was interviewed on the Tim Ferriss show, he talks about his 4 A's of self-observation, right? So awareness, acceptance, action, assessment are his 4 A's. Awareness of a situation, accepting the situation exists, taking action, and then assessing how you're doing, and then running those in a cycle, in a loop. And it's a way to take responsibility for what's happening to you. And for me, I take a slightly different approach to this, but very similar. By the way, also Eric Schmidt writes about how Bill Campbell would stress the importance that there be no gap between statements and fact. Like he called it, I'm quoting here, no gap between statements and fact, be relentlessly honest and candid. So this brings me back to the acknowledgement, acceptance, action, because we can wish for situations to be different. We can tell ourselves stories about how a situation isn't as bad as it looks, or a problem doesn't really exist, or they don't really have a gap or a blind spot. But to be coachable, you have to be willing to look objectively at yourself, to look objectively at situations, be willing to take an action and fix it. This is also a a framework that I've used in ultra running. So when I'm doing these, especially long races, 100 or 200 mile races, like shit goes wrong, right? You're going to miss a turn or go off course. You're going to twist an ankle. You might have GI issues. I've had hallucinations from sleep deprivation. You've had all kinds of wind or heat or rain or snow that wasn't expected. Every race is going to have multiple obstacles. Like if you do these long races, it's just like over a 24 or 48 or 72 hour period. Like for stuff to go perfectly over that long of a period of time, over that much distance, it just ain't going to happen, right? So when things go wrong, you have to be able to acknowledge that they're going wrong, accept that something isn't right, and then be willing to take the action. I mean, heck, I did a 50K this past weekend, and shit went wrong with 8 miles to go, and then shit went wrong again with 2.5 miles to go. I took a pretty nasty fall with 8 miles to go, busted up my left forearm, busted up my hip. No injury, but definitely a lot of pain. And then with 2.5 miles to go, my body completely locked up. I just cramped. Like I hadn't cramped that bad in years. But so anytime you push yourself to do hard things, you're going to stretch yourself out of your comfort zone, and things are going to go wrong. So the best way through those challenges, and this comes back to coachability, how coachable are you? Can you look at those situations objectively? Can you acknowledge that something is not working? Can you accept the situation for what it is and then take the action? Right? So acceptance doesn't, that just basically, to me, I mean, acknowledgement is the first thing that, and I talked a little bit earlier with the honesty and humility. It's basically saying, look, I know something isn't right here. Something needs to be changed. It's being humble enough to say, okay, something ain't right. Acceptance to me is just being present in the moment, like not being mad about it. I should have known better. Well, yeah, of course, like looking back, ex post, decisions are easier to make, choices are easier to make. Like, I should have known to do this, or I wish I would have done that. Well, you can't, right? All you can do is accept the current situation for what it is, because only from there can you then take a necessary action, right? So getting mad or upset because, if it's on the trail because I missed a turn or because I twisted an ankle on a stupid rock doesn't change the situation. So to be coachable means that that getting uncomfortable and doing hard things means shit's going to happen. And when it does, it's an opportunity to learn and do better and implement a new strategy. So this idea of, are you willing to kind of put this, as George Mumford might call, this level, this framework of self-observation into place on a regular basis? Are you willing to acknowledge situations? Can you accept them for what they are and not get mad? And then take an action in order to improve it. Again, on a scale of 1 to 4. And so the last one, this action piece, is where brings me to number 5, which is implementing equals learning. Implementing equals learning. So this is a mantra that I stress all the time, over and over, with our clients, because what I want them to know is that it's fun to brainstorm ideas. It's fun to come up with scenarios. It's fun to go through thought experiments. We can always ask, hey, what if we did this? What if we did that? How about this thing? What about that thing? I read over here, I could try this. Yeah, I mean, those are fun in a lot of cases, because you're being creative, you're coming up with ideas that might be helpful. In the end, though, the only thing that matters is whether or not you take that action. And so implementing equals learning. And what this just means is that, we can come up with a strategy. If you're getting coached and your coach is telling you, like, hey, here's something I think we can do, you get some agreement, you've looked at different options, you feel like this is the best one, then you've got to take that action, because when you do take that action, it's either going to work and you're going to win, or it's not going to work, or it's going to work suboptimally and you're going to learn. And we talk about this in our coaching calls at the start of every coaching call. Every client knows to expect this. The first thing we do when we get onto a call, before we talk about their question, before we talk about their challenge, before we work on the thing that's going to get worked on, is the first question I'm always going to ask, and all of our coaches always ask this question, is, hey, tell me about a win or a learning over the last couple of days. Because both are equally important. Wins are great. We love to hear about how you converted that customer, or you upsold that account, or you charged a higher price, or now your outbound is working. Those are wonderful to hear, and now you're booking meetings. It's also important to say, well, here's the thing I learned. I lost a deal to this situation, and here's why I lost it. And now I know the next time that I need to get the CFO involved earlier in the conversation. Or they chose not to take any action because the CFO said it was too important, they couldn't make budget. And they said, come back to them in Q never, right? So you're either going to win or you're going to learn. And so this comes back to coachability, is that you have to be willing to take the action and be willing to deal with the consequences, both positive and negative, right? So you're either going to win or you're going to learn, because again, no progress happens without that implementation. That's getting out of your comfort zone, right? That's where the real growth happens. So again, score yourself on a scale of 1 to 4. So, these aren't the only 5 measures as to whether or not somebody's coachable, but as I've been ruminating over this the last couple of weeks, reading these books, reading the $1 Trillion Coach, listening to the podcast episode with George Mumford, think about my own experience, think about clients that we have that have been the most successful clients. What I found is that, in all of these cases, these 5 are the ones that are really critical. So I'll just recap them one more time before we wrap up. So number 1 is readiness to learn. Like, this means you're ready to focus, ready to get to work, ready to make the time, not hope that you find the time in order to get things started. Number 2 is honesty and humility, the willingness to look for gaps and blind spots and accept that these gaps exist, and do that without judgment, blame, or excuses, right? Just like, okay, this is where we are. I get it. It sucks. Not the way I want it to be. All right, let's make it better. Number 3, getting uncomfortable. So knowing that in order to grow, you're going to have to do new things. And when you do new things, it means learning. And when you learn, you're going to go through some struggles and frustrations. So getting uncomfortable is the way to make real change. Number 4 is the ability to engage in this mindfulness or self-observation of acknowledgement, acceptance, action. Being able to look at situations, accept where they are, and then take an action. And then number 5 is implementing equals learning. So when you take that action, knowing that it's not always going to work out the way you want, we do the best we can ex ante, hoping for the best, expecting the best, but also being prepared to look at that action and feel like maybe it didn't work. So, and that's okay too, because now we learned something that we can build on for the next time around, for the next cycle. So that's it. Those are my five measures as to, for that question, are you coachable? Are you coachable? So I'll just wrap up here and say, look, like, if you feel like you're coachable, if you feel like you're ready to get some help growing and scaling your startup, if you're a B2B, tech founder, and whether you're early in your journey, you've got a few customers, you've got some revenue, maybe you've just gotten a little bit of funding, and you're like, okay, like I need to get out of this hustle and hard work phase, but I don't know how. I need to build some more systems. I need to build more repeatability. I did well to get to this place, and I'm really glad I put in that work. Nobody else could have done it. But in order to grow to that next phase, I'm going to need some help. Or maybe you've built some systems, and now it's time to grow the team. You're trying to grow from 1 million to 3 or 3 to 10, and you're elevating yourself up in your organization. You're realizing that, well, like, hiring is really hard. Recruiting is really hard. Managing people is really hard. Getting people to sell the way I could sell as a founder is really hard. Making sure that the systems we built are actually working when I hand them over to somebody else is really hard. Again, it's okay. These things happen. It's completely normal. Everyone goes through it. The question is whether or not you're willing to get the help to figure it out. And look, sometimes people can figure it out on their own. It's just a matter of how quickly you want to do it. And it could just be a matter of how much faster could you go if you got some help and you got some coaching, some objective viewpoints, and some advice from people. So if you feel like you're coachable and you think you're ready for some help growing and scaling your startup, then if you're watching this on LinkedIn, you can just comment the word coachable, or send me a DM with the word coachable, and I can share a few more details on how we might be able to help you out. And maybe hop on a quick call and learn a little more about your situation, your startup, to make sure it's a good match. And if you're listening to this on the podcast later on, just shoot me an email. You can shoot me an email at Scott, SCOTT, at salesqualia, QUALIA.com, QUALIA.com. And again, just type the word coachable into the subject line, or podcast, whatever you want, just so I know that you've listened to this and you think you might be ready for some help, that you think you're coachable. And if you are, then we can get to work. And if not, then I'll tell you. And then you can decide whether or not you want to make that change for yourself to get the help that you need. So, all right, everyone. So thanks so much for listening. Thanks for watching. The last thing I'll say is, like, I've also been working on a personal credo over the last couple of years, but also more specifically the last couple months. And sometimes you've heard me say this phrase, go farther, at the end of podcasts or interviews or webinars or emails. And for me, when I think about go farther, it just, it's a metaphor for me in my trail running. How do I go farther? How do I do more, distance or faster or more challenging? How do I keep pushing those limits for myself? And really what that means is to do more. It also means to do it and be happy, and also means to surprise yourself. Do more, be happy, surprise yourself, go farther. And to me, I think the more that we can push ourselves out of the comfort zone, I think the more we'd be surprised on what we're capable of. And I think along the way, making sure that the journey is the joy, to do it in a happy mindset, in a growth mindset. Enjoy being uncomfortable, enjoy being frustrated, because that means you're learning. And just put yourself in a position where you can do more. So do more, be happy, surprise yourself, go farther. All right, that's it for now. Scott Sambucci at Sales